What if your own father stripped you of your name, your title, your royal identity, while sitting across from you in a cold, dimly lit palace room? No press, no ceremony, just a quiet sentence that cut deeper than any headline ever could. That's exactly what happened, and no one saw it coming. Prince Harry walked into Clarence's house expecting a routine check-in, perhaps an awkward conversation, maybe even a cold cup of Earl Grey. But what he walked out with, or rather, what he walked out without, shook not only his world, but the very foundations of the British monarchy. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Gone. In a matter of minutes, the title he had carried since 2018, a title bestowed by Queen Elizabeth II on the happiest day of his life, his wedding day, was about to be formally revoked. And in its place, a title he once tried to avoid being associated with. Earl of Dumbarton. Yes, Dumbarton, a title that, according to reports, even Meghan Markle once whispered she found unfortunate and not globally palatable. And now, that's exactly what he'd be left with. Not by choice, but by decree. But let's be clear, this wasn't just about nobility on paper. This wasn't about branding or tabloid fodder. This was about power, identity, revenge, and a monarchy tightening its grip after years of unraveling scandal, rebellion, and televised accusations. And it all started with a meeting no one outside the palace walls was supposed to know about. But why now? Why, after years of public drama, Megxit, Oprah, Netflix, Spare, would King Charles finally make his move now? What was the final straw? And more importantly, what did he plan to replace the title with? Or was this someone else's idea all along? Because here's what the press won't tell you. This wasn't a solo decision. Not entirely. Whispers from within the House of Lords. Rumors about a sealed note from Queen Elizabeth's private diary. A mysterious phone call from Sandringham. And a palace strategy meeting so confidential, even Camilla's closest aides were locked out of the room. And then there's the ultimate irony. Prince Harry never wanted the title of Duke of Sussex in the first place. In fact, years ago, just before his engagement, he allegedly asked the Queen if it could be skipped altogether. He wanted to be just Harry. That's what friends say. That's what his Netflix documentary hinted at. That's what the world believed. But here's the thing about royalty. Once you try to leave, they make sure you feel every door close behind you. Because for years, the Sussex title was a symbol of rebellion, a royal branch gone rogue. The Duke and Duchess who didn't just break tradition, they bulldozed it. And that title, emblazoned across bestsellers and court depositions and Spotify contracts, became a thorn in the monarchy's side. Not because of the title itself, but because of what it had come to represent: autonomy, disruption, and above all, disobedience. And now, the House of Windsor wants it back. But what does that mean for Harry, for Meghan, for their children? What does it mean for a man born into one of the most ancient, rigid institutions on earth to suddenly find himself untethered? And don't let the headlines fool you. This wasn't a clean break. It wasn't a dignified parting of ways. It was messy, emotional, raw. Sources say tears were shed, voices were raised, doors slammed, and somewhere in all of it, a single word was muttered that reportedly sent Prince Harry over the edge. Dumbarton. Now, let's be honest. To the average listener, the name Dumbarton doesn't exactly stir a sense of prestige. It's not Cambridge. It's not Windsor. It's not even Kent. It's obscure, blunt, almost cartoonish, some have said. And yet, it's real. It's old. It's legally binding. And most importantly, it's what Harry might soon be left with. But here's where things get more complicated. Because while King Charles may have signed off on the move, insiders say the idea may have originated from someone else entirely. Someone whose relationship with Harry has been rocky at best and strategic at worst. Someone who has quietly wielded influence behind the scenes while keeping a composed smile in public. And no, it's not William. It's someone else. Someone unexpected. But we'll get to that. For now, let's take a step back. Because this isn't just about what happened in that meeting room at Clarence's house. It's about everything that led up to it. Every interview, every headline, every smirk across the royal balcony, every gesture that went unnoticed until it was far too late. You see, the fall of the Duke of Sussex title isn't an isolated event. It's the result of years, no, decades, of tension, family drama, personal grief, institutional pressure, and public scrutiny that only intensified when Harry met Meghan, married her, and moved halfway across the world to reinvent their lives. And whether you love them or loathe them, you can't deny this. No one in the royal family's modern history has ever provoked such division, such commentary, and such chaos as the Sussexes. But what happens when the institution fights back? Because let's not kid ourselves. The monarchy has survived centuries of scandal, abdications, affairs, infighting, even civil war, and they've never once given up their power without a fight. So when Harry and Meghan began rebranding Sussex into a global brand, Sussex Royal, Archewell, books, podcasts, documentaries, did they cross a line? A line the crown was willing to tolerate only for so long? And if so, who decides when that line has been crossed? A monarch? A prime minister? A media empire? Or the public? Because make no mistake, this decision wasn't made in a vacuum. It came after weeks of pressure, a string of public embarrassments, a worrying poll about royal popularity, a leaked memo that stunned even the most hardened palace aides, and then a quiet emergency meeting, the one Harry was summoned to without warning, the one where everything changed. And here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because for a man who spent his life trying to forge his own path, first as a soldier, then as a husband, then as a father, having your identity revoked by the very family you were born into is no small thing. It's humiliation, yes, but it's also transformation. Because what do you become when the world no longer calls you Duke? Just Harry? Or something far more dangerous? Because what Harry does next, how he responds to this symbolic severing, may redefine not only his legacy, but the monarchy's ability to survive in the 21st century. And we'll get there. But first, let's go back to the beginning. To that cold March afternoon at Clarence House. To the moment King Charles looked his youngest son in the eye and told him the crown no longer recognized his title. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. He never saw it coming. Prince Harry had received the message the night before. A discreet courier arrived at the gates of his Montecito mansion. No signature, no formal heading. Just a cream envelope, sealed with the red wax insignia of Clarence House, and a single line typed inside. You are requested for a confidential meeting at Clarence House. Your presence is required. No advisors. No reason. No context. Just the kind of stark directive Harry thought he had left behind when he stepped back from royal duties. But something about the wording was off. It wasn't a polite invitation. It was a summons. Why now? Harry showed the note to Meghan. Her brow furrowed. Her mouth formed a tight line. No words, just that look, the one she gave when she knew something had gone sour. Still, Harry had made a promise. Despite everything, the interviews, the books, the deals, he said he'd always come when his father called. But was this really about reconciliation? Or something more permanent? The private jet landed quietly at RAF Nordholt the following morning. There was no press, no fanfare, not even a palace car waiting on the tarmac. Instead, a lone black Range Rover idled near the runway, a nondescript driver holding a clipboard that simply read, H. Wales. Not Duke of Sussex. Just H. Wales. That should have been the first red flag. The drive to Clarence House was unusually silent. The usual London bustle felt muted, like the city itself knew something big was about to unfold. As the gates opened, Harry felt an eerie déjà vu. Memories of walking these same halls as a teenager, still reeling from Diana's death, trying to make sense of a world that refused to explain itself. The staff greeted him with stiff smiles. No warm embraces. No friendly chatter. His Majesty is expecting you in the green room, one aide said quietly, not meeting his eyes. Green room. Not the usual sitting room. Not the family study. No, the green room was different. Formal. Public-facing. Symbolic. It's where Queen Elizabeth had received heads of state, where Charles had once hosted dignitaries from the Commonwealth. It wasn't a room for personal conversations. It was a stage, and Harry was about to be center of it. He pushed open the door and froze. King Charles sat alone. No tea tray, no documents spread on the antique desk, just a small folder in his lap and a single look in his eyes, resolved. Harry sat down. No hug, no handshake. Charles spoke first. Thank you for coming, he said. A pause. Silence thick enough to slice. "I'll be direct," Charles continued, opening the folder and removing a single sheet of parchment. "Effective in the coming weeks, we are initiating a formal adjustment of titles. Specifically yours. You will no longer be styled as His Royal Highness, the Duke of Sussex." Harry blinked. At first, he thought he'd misheard. Maybe his father had mumbled. Maybe he meant something else. But then he looked again at the official paper in his father's hand and saw the royal arms stamped in wax. No ambiguity. No room for misunderstanding. Charles had just revoked the title Harry had carried since his wedding day. The title the Queen had bestowed upon him with pride and tradition. The title that had become both shield and sword in the years since he'd left the firm. Now gone. Without ceremony. Without warning. And just like that, Harry's stomach sank. Not because of the status. He never cared much for protocol. But because of what this meant. It wasn't just a rejection of a name. It was a rejection of him. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Charles nodded. "This isn't personal. It's constitutional. There have been complications. Parliament has raised questions. There is precedent." "Don't," Harry interrupted. "Don't hide behind procedure. Just say it." His father didn't blink. "You've made choices. This is the consequence." There it was. Cold. Blunt. Royal. The very tone Harry had fled from. The language of duty over blood. Harry clenched his fists, trying to hold back a flood of emotion. But it was like watching a dam crack in slow motion. He had flown halfway across the world, not for an ambush, but maybe, deep down, hoping for some sort of olive branch. Instead, he got a guillotine. But it wasn't over. Because Charles wasn't done. "There is, however, a designation still in place," he continued, turning the paper around so Harry could read the final line. "You will remain styled as the Earl of Dumbarton." Silence. Complete. Echoing. Unbelievable. Dumbarton. That word again. That relic of a title, given as a subsidiary one on his wedding day. One he had quietly shelved. One that Meghan had privately found unappealing, even comic, according to certain insiders. Now, that was what he would be known as. Prince Harry, the Earl of Dumbarton? It sounded like a punchline. A downgrade. A slap cloaked in courtesy. And Charles knew it. But the reasoning, the timing, the orchestrated formality, it all pointed to something bigger. This wasn't just a personal decision. This was a calculated palace move. But whose idea was it? Charles hadn't answered that question. Not directly. Harry stood. "I see," he said, voice shaking. "Is there anything else?" Charles nodded slowly. "There will be a public announcement. In due time. This conversation will remain confidential until then." Of course it would. Until the press release was drafted. Until the royal press machine spun it into something palatable. A mutual agreement. An administrative change. A clarification of roles. But Harry knew the truth. This wasn't mutual. It wasn't administrative. And it sure as hell wasn't just about clarity. It was punishment. A final, irrevocable message. You are not one of us anymore. He didn't wait for formal goodbyes. He turned and walked out. Back through the corridor, past the same portraits of his ancestors that had watched over every scandal, every betrayal, every royal fracture before this one. But the real twist? It wasn't just Charles's decision. Behind the scenes, other hands had helped script this moment. Other voices had whispered in the king's ear. Voices Harry never imagined would turn so definitively against him. Voices he once trusted. Voices that had now sealed his fate. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. One sentence. 14 words. And just like that, Prince Harry's world tilted off its axis. He had barely returned to his temporary residence in London when the news broke. Not via private call. Not through a dignified family chain. No, it exploded on the palace's official website, posted at exactly 9 a.m. London time. As if it had been scheduled. As if someone, somewhere, couldn't wait to press publish. His Majesty the King has approved an adjustment of styles and titles. The Duke of Sussex will henceforth be styled as the Earl of Dumbarton. No frills. No context. No compassion. Just cold, administrative language carved in centuries of ceremonial ice. And within seconds, it was everywhere. Sky News. BBC. The Daily Mail. CNN. Even TMZ. Phones buzzed. Alerts flashed. Twitter. No. X. lit up with hashtags like hashtag Dumbarton Drama and hashtag Sussex No More. Commentators scrambled for context. Royal experts lined up for interviews. And the public? Stunned. Some gasped. Others laughed. Some rejoiced. Many wept. But Prince Harry? He stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. Until finally, he whispered the same question so many others around the world were asking. What just happened? Let's rewind. Because this wasn't supposed to be public, yet. When Harry left Clarence House, the agreement was clear. The news would be rolled out in phases. Quietly. With time to prepare statements. To process. To protect the children. But someone leaked it early. And not just leaked it, weaponized it. Within minutes, the phrasing was dissected. Why say adjustment and not removal? Why use approved instead of initiated? And why was Meghan's name nowhere to be seen? The answer was strategic. By focusing solely on Harry, the palace had effectively severed one half of the brand. Duke and Duchess of Sussex was now just history. And with it, so was their shared legal identity in the United Kingdom's aristocratic structure. The royal PR machine was brilliant in its cruelty, because in one move, they had turned Harry into something unprecedented. A senior royal by blood, now ranked lower in status than his older cousins, minor viscounts, and even extended aristocracy with no royal bloodline at all. But wait, was this even legal? As experts scrambled to interpret the statement, several constitutional scholars pointed to a crucial footnote, the Letters Patent of 1917. Issued by King George V, the Letters Patent was a foundational document in royal hierarchy. It defined who could and couldn't use royal styles like prince, princess, and most importantly, who could hold certain dukedoms. But here's the catch. It also gave the reigning monarch full authority to amend, revoke, or reassign titles at will. Yes, at will. And King Charles had just done it. But here's the part that few noticed right away. The statement had no quote from Charles himself. No quote. No photo. No personal reflection. Just the seal. Why? Because, according to palace insiders, Charles didn't want to do this publicly. In fact, multiple sources suggest he hesitated for months. But pressure was mounting. From where? Parliament. Senior aides. Even international Commonwealth leaders reportedly questioned the continued use of Duke of Sussex by someone who had so publicly rejected royal life. And then came the tipping point. A viral video clip, only 30 seconds long. Meghan, during a podcast taping, had made an offhand remark about never feeling accepted by the institution, even when she wore the crown. She didn't name names. She didn't say the firm. But that was all it took. The clip exploded across UK tabloids. MPs demanded clarity. Royal traditionalists seethed. The Daily Telegraph ran a blistering editorial. If you reject the crown, you can't keep the crest. Suddenly, King Charles found himself trapped. If he didn't act, it would look like weakness. If he did act, it would be war. He chose war. But why Dumbarton? Here's where things get personal. The title Earl of Dumbarton was not random. It had been part of the Sussex wedding bundle, granted on the morning of Harry's marriage by Queen Elizabeth herself. But according to sources close to Meghan, she had objected to the name early on. Not publicly, not in interviews, but privately. Back in 2019, a BBC documentary caught a rare off-camera remark from Meghan while visiting Scotland. Looking up at a Dumbarton Castle sign, she reportedly said, "It sounds like Dumtown." Not very regal, is it? It was a throwaway comment. Or so she thought. But that clip resurfaced. And it stung. Because now, with Sussex gone, Dumbarton wasn't just the consolation prize. It was the message. A title that evoked ridicule. A name the public already associated with awkwardness. And now, it was his only official styling in the United Kingdom. No wonder people called it a royal demotion. But it gets worse. Because titles aren't just names, they're brands. The Sussex name had become the foundation of Harry and Meghan's empire. From their Archwell Foundation to podcast deals, publishing rights, and international charity events, everything bore the Sussex seal. So what happens now? Technically, they can still use Sussex in a personal capacity overseas. But any formal association with the crown? Gone. Which means potential lawsuits, licensing restrictions, global brand confusion. And behind closed doors, Meghan reportedly did not take it well. Sources say she received the official notice just minutes after Harry did. Her reaction? Fury, disbelief, and something else, strategy. Because while the world was still digesting the news, Meghan was already on the phone with legal teams in California. One source overheard her asking, "Can they legally revoke a title we built into a trademark? Isn't this retaliation?" Retaliation. That word matters. Because if the move could be framed as punishment, especially in light of their past accusations about race, trauma, and institutional abuse, it could reignite a global conversation about monarchy, power, and bias. And that's exactly what Harry and Meghan were reportedly debating in those first 24 hours after the announcement. Should they fight this? Or let it go? Because either way, the battle lines had shifted. The palace had drawn first blood. And the public? Torn. Some felt sympathy. Others felt vindication. Many were simply stunned at how swift and cold the statement had been. No thank you. No recognition. No gratitude for service. Just deleted. But perhaps the most shocking reaction came from an unlikely source. Princess Anne, the usually silent, unflinching royal, allegedly made a comment during a private lunch the same day. According to an eyewitness, when asked whether the move was too harsh, she responded flatly, "If he wants to be free of the monarchy, let him be free. Entirely." Ouch. That wasn't just a royal aunt weighing in. That was the palace's enforcer signaling full institutional support for the decision. But the public doesn't know the full story. Because behind the pageantry, behind the parchment, behind the carefully worded statement, was a coordinated, ruthless operation that had been months in the making. And Harry? He had just stepped into a minefield. Because the statement was only the beginning. The consequences, the ripple effects, the retaliation, all of that was still to come. And when it did, it wouldn't just threaten Harry and Meghan's royal relationship. It would expose cracks in the monarchy itself that had been quietly spreading for years. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The crown didn't act alone. While the headlines screamed about King Charles and his shocking revocation of Prince Harry's title, few noticed the real machinery grinding in the shadows. Because buried beneath the palace corridors, beyond the velvet thrones and golden state rooms, was a quieter power, one older than most imagined. One that could shape titles, steer royal narratives, and even whisper into a monarch's ear without ever appearing on camera. That power was Parliament. Yes, while the British monarchy may dazzle with jewels and tradition, the real political teeth live under the ancient rafters of Westminster. And long before King Charles signed that document stripping his youngest son of the Duke of Sussex title, murmurs had already started within the House of Lords. Murmurs that would soon grow into a full-blown whisper campaign. Quiet, strategic, ruthless. But why would politicians, some of whom barely attended royal functions, care about a royal title? Because Harry wasn't just a runaway prince anymore. He was a wild card. A global figure with a microphone, a Netflix contract, and no script. And in the eyes of many senior lords, that made him dangerous. Let's rewind 6 months. Late autumn, Westminster. A closed-door committee session was held, marked private in the official record. The topic? Review of the role of non-working royals in the use of noble titles. That's a sanitized way of saying, how do we deal with Harry and Meghan? According to a senior clerk who leaked portions of the minutes, the session was anything but civil. One peer reportedly began with, "We cannot continue calling someone a duke when he openly undermines the institution that granted him the title." Another chimed in, "If he were an MP, he'd have been deselected years ago. Why do we tiptoe around royal privilege?" What followed was a debate that stretched 2 hours and left many stunned. Because it wasn't just about Harry. It was about precedent. What happens when a royal title becomes a brand? What happens when that brand is used in international deals that the crown has no control over? And perhaps most dangerously, what happens when that title becomes a weapon in a cultural war the monarchy cannot afford to lose? There were proposals floated, some radical. One suggested a bill requiring royals to relinquish noble titles if they resided outside the UK for more than 5 consecutive years. Another, less publicized but far more venomous, proposed restricting usage of noble titles in foreign jurisdictions unless pre-approved by the Home Office. In short, bureaucratic exile. Nothing passed officially, but the tone was clear. There was pressure. There was urgency. and there was appetite for change. Then came the real twist. 2 weeks later, an anonymous briefing paper was circulated among key MPs and lords. The author? Unconfirmed. But palace insiders suspect a senior royal aide with close ties to Queen Camilla's communications team. The paper, simply titled On the Modern Use of Royal Titles, was brutal. It outlined how the continued use of the Duke of Sussex title by Prince Harry was creating constitutional confusion, public discontent, and even foreign diplomatic awkwardness. It cited recent polling data from YouGov showing plummeting approval ratings. It highlighted Meghan's controversial media statements and their effect on Commonwealth morale. And it ended with a single line. The integrity of the monarchy rests on clarity. Either you are in, or you are not. Within a month, whispers turned into momentum. Select members of the Lords began reaching out privately to the palace, not demanding action, but suggesting it. A kind of plausible deniability emerged. No official orders. No parliamentary vote. Just recommendations. Recommendations that held weight. Because when a dozen lords suggest that retaining a controversial title might invite legislative inquiry, any monarch with survival instincts listens. And Charles? He listened. But not before one more event shifted everything in a high gear. A scheduled debate in the Commons about constitutional reform was hijacked, briefly, by an unexpected question. Will the Prime Minister consider advising His Majesty on the matter of royal titles in light of recent public statements by the Duke of Sussex? It was asked innocently, casually, but it opened the floodgates. For the first time in years, a royal title was being publicly discussed in a legislative body, not as a matter of ceremony, but of governance. And that terrified the palace. Because if Parliament got involved formally, if this became a political football, it would be out of royal hands. The monarchy has always walked a delicate balance. They exist by the will of Parliament, but must remain above politics. If they slip into the realm of debate, the mystique breaks. So Charles did what monarchs have always done when threatened by the shadows of Parliament. He acted preemptively, but quietly. A single meeting was arranged with Lord Chamberlain, head of the royal household and one of the few figures who bridges the divide between government and crown. The message was clear. We will handle this internally. That, of course, was code for, give us time. We'll clean it up before it escalates. And thus, the gears began turning. Legal advisors were called. Historical precedent reviewed. Language drafted. Titles examined. All behind closed doors. Harry was not informed. Nor was Meghan. Nor were the public. But somewhere inside the palace, a countdown had begun. And when the moment finally came, when that statement dropped online, it wasn't just the royal family reclaiming a title. It was the monarchy averting a political nightmare. But not everyone was satisfied. A small but vocal faction of reformist MPs still demand more. Some are calling for a full review of all royal titles. Others want a public registry of title holders' activity. Transparency for taxpayers, they say. And while no formal vote occurred, no legislation passed, those same MPs are preparing something far more explosive. A white paper. One that challenges the very nature of how titles are distributed, maintained, and, yes, revoked. And if that paper finds its way into the press, this isn't over. Not by a long shot. Because what started as a quiet push in Parliament may soon explode into a full-blown constitutional confrontation. And Prince Harry? He's no longer just a family member caught in the crossfire. He's the symbol at the heart of a centuries-old institution, being forced to choose, reform or survival. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. If he wants to be free of the monarchy, let him be free. Entirely. That single sentence, uttered by Princess and during a closed-door royal strategy meeting, would later become the stuff of legend, echoed in palace corridors, repeated in private clubs, and whispered by royal aides who knew better than to speak on record. But those 14 words didn't just reflect Anne's opinion. They lit the match that would turn a simmering crisis into a royal inferno. Because while King Charles agonized, Parliament pushed, and Prince Harry reeled from losing his title, it was Princess and the Princess Royal who provided the one thing Buckingham Palace needed most in that moment: brutal clarity. Let's not sugarcoat it. And doesn't play games. She never has. She's the royal with no patience for drama. The one who never asked for the spotlight, but earned more respect in military and charity circles than almost anyone in the family. She's known as the hardest-working royal, attending more engagements annually than even her brother. She has never complained, never courted attention, never aired family grievances on television. And when it came to protecting the crown, she didn't flinch. So when she heard about the internal debates, the late-night palace meetings, the pressure from Parliament, the worry over brand damage from Harry and Meghan's media blitz, and had one response. Why is this even a debate? According to a former royal advisor present at the meeting, and arrived at Clarence House wearing her usual dark green field jacket and a look that could freeze a fire. She sat down at the long mahogany table, surrounded by King Charles, Camilla, and two top aides from the Lord Chamberlain's office. She didn't wait to be asked. "I've read the memos," she said. "I've seen the interviews. I've watched the clips." She paused. Enough is enough. The room reportedly went still. Even Charles, usually calm in moments like these, tightened his jaw. Camilla, sipping tea, offered a subtle nod. One aide tried to interject, suggesting more time to weigh public optics. And cut him off. "We've spent years doing that. While he, Harry, sits in Montecito and drags the monarchy through another PR disaster every other month." She turned to Charles. "Take the title. Let him live the life he wants. But stop pretending he can have it both ways." It was a moment of raw, unfiltered realness. The kind that made people uncomfortable, but also impossible to ignore, and had always been fiercely loyal to the Queen's vision of a streamlined monarchy. She believed in a core group of working royals. Those who served, those who showed up, and those who understood that duty came before personal grievance. In her view, Harry had broken that contract years ago, and the Duke of Sussex title had become a contradiction in itself. "You want to modernize the monarchy?" she reportedly asked Charles. "Start by removing the inconsistencies." And here's the thing, Charles listened. Because, and wasn't coming from a place of spite. She wasn't political. She didn't care about headlines or public backlash. She cared about legacy. And legacy, in her mind, couldn't be built on exceptions. Let's rewind for a moment. And has always had a complicated relationship with her younger relatives. Not hostile, just distant. She was never close with Harry. Not because of animosity, but because they were cut from entirely different cloths. Anne's generation was stoic, restrained, bound by the post-war royal code of never complain, never explain. Harry, by contrast, was expressive, emotional, open, and in the eyes of many traditional royals, too open. When he and Meghan began doing sit-down interviews, launching personal documentaries, and releasing explosive memoirs, and reportedly viewed it all as excruciating. Privately, she's believed to have said, "We don't solve problems with cameras." So when she learned that Charles was hesitating, still unsure whether stripping Harry of the Sussex title was too harsh, too final, too risky, she stepped in, not with rage, not with venom, but with resolve. A former palace aide described her tone that day as surgical. She was like a general, calm, measured, but utterly decisive. No one dared argue. But behind the calm was fire. Because and wasn't just defending protocol. She was defending her mother's legacy. Queen Elizabeth II had always believed in a monarchy built on service, not celebrity. And while she loved Harry dearly, she had made clear in her final years that titles had to reflect function. That's why, when Harry stepped back from royal duties, Elizabeth quietly removed the HRH styling from official communications. She didn't revoke the Duke of Sussex title then, but she had started the process of distancing. And Anne, she remembered. So as Parliament leaned harder, as press scrutiny grew louder, and as Meghan reportedly drafted another round of potential legal challenges and made her move. And not just with words. According to an insider, she handed Charles a handwritten note during that meeting, an excerpt from one of the Queen's last diary entries. No one knows the exact wording, but sources say it included a reference to those who serve in name only, but not in spirit. Charles read it twice. Then, slowly, he folded the note and placed it in his coat pocket. Later that night, when alone, he reportedly reread it again and made his decision. The next morning, a confidential memo was sent to the Royal Household Legal Office. Begin preparation for reclassification of titles. Focus, Sussex. But Anne's involvement didn't end there. She also made a call to Prince Edward, her younger brother, quiet, often overlooked, but deeply respected within the family. According to those familiar with the call, Anne urged Edward to support the move publicly, or at least not oppose it behind the scenes. "We can't have a divided house," she told him. Edward, who had once faced his own title controversy, being denied the Duke of Edinburgh title until late in life, understood the importance of timing. He agreed, and just like that, the internal opposition faded. Even William, who had long kept his feelings about Harry out of public meetings, reportedly said during a private phone call with Charles, "If Anne's on board, I won't object." And Camilla? She simply smiled, because what Anne had done, in one afternoon, was bring coherence to chaos. She had taken the swirling storm of indecision and anchored it with logic, with precedent, with royal muscle. And Charles, who had spent much of his reign trying to walk the line between modernity and tradition, finally stepped across it. But here's the twist. What Anne didn't know was that Harry had already learned about the internal discussions. Through what source? We'll get to that. But suffice it to say, when Harry discovered that the final push had come not from William, not from Camilla, not even directly from Charles, but from Princess Anne, it hit him like a punch to the gut. Because Anne, in his mind, had always been the neutral one, the no-nonsense aunt, the stoic soldier, the one person in the family he thought might understand why he chose a different path. But now, she had signed the metaphorical death warrant for his title. And that betrayal would fuel what came next. Because Harry wasn't done, and neither was Meghan. And while the palace thought the title revocation would end the Sussex saga, it had only ignited the next act. Because Harry had one more card left to play, and it came from the other side of the Atlantic. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It was only 4 pages long, typed, double-spaced, with bold headings and bullet points. But the moment that memo landed in the inbox of Sir Clive Alderton, King Charles's most senior private secretary, the palace descended into what one insider called controlled panic. Because this wasn't just a legal letter. It was a message, the clearest and most confrontational statement Meghan Markle had ever made to the Crown since she left the UK. And the timing? Deliberate. The memo arrived just 72 hours after the announcement stripping Prince Harry of the Duke of Sussex title. Not a minute before, not a minute after. It was coordinated, targeted, and legally bulletproof. But it wasn't sent through official diplomatic channels. No embassy, no Commonwealth consulate, no pomp. Just a clean email from the Sussex's California-based legal team, with a carbon copy sent, unusually, to several senior UK media outlets under embargo. The subject line? Legal notification. Misuse of royal title governance and reputational harassment. A declaration of war. But let's back up. Because this memo wasn't a reaction, it was part of a long-brewing strategy. Ever since Meghan and Harry stepped back from senior royal duties in early 2020, there had been tension over their use of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles. At first, the palace tried to play nice. Remember Sussex Royal? Their original branding before the Queen intervened? That quiet request for them to refrain from using royal in their commercial branding? That was the first shot, and Meghan didn't forget. Insiders say that from the moment they were asked to rebrand, Meghan began assembling a quiet, elite legal advisory group in the U.S. specializing in intellectual property, aristocratic law, and international branding. She wanted options, not because she feared losing the title, but because she suspected they might try. And she was right. So when the announcement finally came, removing Duke of Sussex from Harry's official styling, Meghan was ready. The memo, according to sources who read it in full, outlined 3 key legal threats: brand damages and contract interference. The Sussexes had entered multiple commercial agreements, Netflix, Spotify, before it collapsed, Penguin Random House, and others, using the title. The removal of the dukedom, the memo argued, caused material reputational harm and brand confusion in multiple jurisdictions. In other words, you just cost us money. Lots of it. Potential violation of trademark protections. The Sussexes had previously trademarked Archewell and Sussex Royal in multiple territories, including the US, Canada, and Australia. The memo threatened to explore whether the palace's actions constituted arbitrary revocation of legally intertwined identifiers. Legal jargon? Yes, but it boiled down to this. You took something that we built a business around, and you may not have the right to. Reputational retaliation and civil harassment. This was the most explosive. Meghan's team argued that the removal of the title was not simply administrative. It was retaliatory in nature, allegedly in response to previous interviews, podcast content, and memoir revelations. They floated the possibility that the revocation constituted patterned reputational harassment under UK civil law. Now, to most legal scholars, these were long-shot arguments. The Crown owns the titles. Full stop. They can give and take at will. That's been precedent since before Magna Carta. But Meghan's lawyers weren't aiming for a courtroom win. They were aiming for headlines. And they got them. Within 12 hours of the embargo lifting, American media outlets were running with it. CNN. Meghan Markle strikes back. Legal team says title removal retaliatory. NBC. Palace war escalates. Sussex's alleged civil harassment over title loss. And on social media? Chaos. The hashtag reinstate Sussex began trending. Royal loyalists clashed with Sussex fans in online battles more ferocious than any political debate. Memes exploded. Threads dissected obscure British peerage law. Even Oprah was reportedly deeply concerned, according to one of her producers. She feels it spiraling in a dangerous direction. And Meghan? She remained silent, at least in public. Behind the scenes, she was very much in control. Multiple sources say she was in direct contact with her legal team every few hours during those crucial early days. She reviewed the language. She strategized the talking points. She even suggested leveraging key relationships in Hollywood to quietly rally support among influential allies. That's when the endorsements started rolling in. Kerry Washington liked a post. Mindy Kaling retweeted a hashtag. Serena Williams posted a cryptic quote about standing up even when you're told to sit down. It wasn't random. It was coordinated. Because Meghan understood something the palace didn't. The fight wasn't about titles. It was about narrative. And if she could frame this as the monarchy punishing a biracial American woman who dared speak her truth, the royals would lose the global sympathy battle overnight. The palace knew it. And they scrambled. In an extremely rare move, a spokesperson for Buckingham Palace issued a clarification just 2 days later. The adjustment to styles and titles was conducted in accordance with established precedent and with full transparency. It is not a reflection of personal relationships, but of structural clarity within the royal household. Translation, please don't sue us. But the damage was done, because by then, Meghan's legal threats had reached ears far beyond Britain. A private source within the United Nations confirmed that an inquiry had been submitted to a UK embassy from a small NGO asking whether peerage discrimination based on media expression violated international cultural protection standards. Ridiculous? Maybe. But it made headlines. And headlines shape perception. Still, what made this moment different was how it played inside the royal walls. This time, there was fear. Not of legal consequences, but of exposure. Because if Meghan really wanted to, she could blow open the entire process of how the title removal unfolded. She could subpoena emails. She could demand correspondence. She could, in effect, drag the Crown's private deliberations into the public domain. And even if no court granted her that power, the mere threat was enough to make several royal aides lose sleep. But here's the twist. Despite the aggressive tone of the memo, Meghan's lawyers included one unexpected paragraph, titled simply, Alternative Resolution. In it, they offered a conditional truce. The Sussexes would not pursue further legal action if the palace agreed to two things. A formal acknowledgement in the press release that the decision was made with mutual understanding and familial respect. A guarantee that the children, Archie and Lilibet, would retain their prince and princess stylings under the 1917 letters patent. Now that was the real objective. Because while Harry and Meghan could live without Duke and Duchess, they couldn't accept their children being frozen out of the royal lineage. Especially after everything they had said, on Oprah, on Netflix, and Spare. If the titles were erased, their children would be royal in blood, but not in name. That, to Meghan, was unacceptable. And so, The memo, while couched in legal fire, was really a negotiation tactic, a strategic power play. But did it work? That's what shook the palace. Because while Charles refused to backpedal publicly, privately, he was torn. One source close to the king said he was deeply pained by the threat of legal escalation, especially one involving his grandchildren. And it was at that very moment, when things were spiraling fastest, that something entirely unexpected happened. A document surfaced, not from Meghan, not from Harry, but from someone long since departed, Queen Elizabeth II, her personal diary, her final entries. And in them was a handwritten line about Harry that would change everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. She never said it in public, not to the cameras, not in official speeches, not even in her carefully curated Christmas broadcasts that had, for decades, balanced poise with pointed silences. But she did write it down, word for word, in her unmistakable blue fountain pen, in her own hand. And when those words were quietly discovered by Sir Edward Young, her former private secretary, while organizing her final papers, it shook the palace to its core. Because in a simple leather-bound diary marked QER, Final Thoughts, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II had left behind a passage about her grandson Harry. A passage she never intended for public release. A passage filled with heartache, maternal conflict, and royal foresight. And it read like a farewell letter not just to Harry, but to the very idea of what the monarchy had once been and what it might become. But before we get to the words themselves, let's rewind. The diary had been locked in a private drawer in her Windsor Castle writing desk, along with a few personal letters, photographs, and one particularly worn envelope containing the final draft of her Platinum Jubilee speech, with small pencil edits scrawled in the margins. That desk, her sacred space, was off-limits, even to senior aides, until after her funeral. It wasn't until a special royal archivist team began the process of documenting her personal correspondence and materials for the Royal Collection Trust that the diary was uncovered. No digital version, no typed entries, just ink, parchment, and decades of personal reflections bound in royal green. There were entries on state visits, world leaders, family birthdays, and then, near the very end, dated August 30th, 2022. Just 9 days before she passed at Balmoral, was the entry that stopped Sir Edward in his tracks. A title scrawled at the top in her firm script. On Harry. The tone? Quiet. Reflective. But undeniably heavy. Here's what insiders say it said, in part. I have thought long about Henry. He was always a boy with light in his eyes. Mischievous, yes, but with a heart that felt deeper than he often let on. I have loved him fiercely, still do. But love in this family is not without structure. That has always been our burden and our blessing. And then, the line that reportedly left Charles speechless when it was read aloud to him in private. He has chosen a path far from us now, perhaps a new crown of his own making. But crowns made of grievance do not carry the weight of legacy. Let that sink in. Crowns made of grievance. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't dismissive. It was clinical, philosophical, regal. A grandmother speaking as monarch, and a monarch speaking as grandmother. And yet, she wasn't done. If titles are to mean anything, they must be lived, not worn. I granted him Duke of Sussex with hope. I now carry sadness for what it has come to represent. But I do not regret loving him, nor do I regret letting him go. Those final 3 sentences would spark furious debate among royal commentators once the diary was quietly leaked to a select few senior palace officials. Because they were layered. She acknowledged granting the title with hope. A deeply emotional word. She mourned what it had become, and she framed Harry's departure not as betrayal, but as inevitability. In one stroke, the Queen had both blessed and broken the legacy of Sussex. And though the public would not see this entry for many months, if ever, it became the cornerstone of what came next. Because when Charles read the passage, as described by one insider, he went utterly still. He didn't speak for a long time. He just ran his fingers over her handwriting and looked out the window. Then he whispered, she knew. It was the moment everything crystallized. For months, Charles had been walking a tightrope, trying to balance public pressure, parliamentary pressure, family pressure, and a crumbling relationship with his youngest son. But here, in the Queen's own hand, was validation. Permission. A message not just of approval, but absolution. Stripping Harry of the title of Duke of Sussex wasn't vengeance. It wasn't political. It was royal duty, finalized by the woman who had defined it for 70 years. But that wasn't how Harry saw it. Because when the palace, in an act of stunning arrogance or carelessness, depending on who you believe, leaked that the Queen had left behind thoughts on Harry in her private writings, it reached Montecito within hours. And Meghan? She was livid. According to one of her staff, she slammed the door to her private office when she read the report. Not because the Queen had written something unflattering, but because it meant the palace was now using the late Queen's words as political cover. "They're hiding behind a dead woman's dignity," she reportedly said. Harry, on the other hand, went silent. For an entire afternoon, he didn't speak to anyone, except one person, Elton John. Yes, the pop icon and longtime family friend. Sources say Harry called Elton in tears, asking whether the Queen had ever spoken to him about the family breakdown, whether she had ever confided concern, whether she had felt regret. Elton, ever the diplomat, told him, "She loved you, mate. But she was Queen until the end." It wasn't the answer Harry wanted. And so, the diary entry, though never officially published, became a ghost in the room, haunting every conversation, every news segment, every royal strategy call, because it said what no one else could say without consequence, that the title of Duke of Sussex had become a symbol of fracture, and that no matter how much personal affection remained, the crown would always come first. But here's the part no one expected. Hidden beneath the Queen's reflections on Harry was a line written in parentheses, an afterthought, almost. A single reference to a sealed envelope labeled "In Trust" for Charles. That envelope, according to multiple palace sources, contained instructions regarding future titles, particularly concerning Archie and Lilibet. And when Charles opened it, he found a brief but powerful note. Children must not suffer for the paths of their parents. Let them choose their place when they are of age. It changed everything, because even as the palace moved to erase the Duke of Sussex, there was now an open question. Would Archie and Lilibet still retain their birthright titles? Prince, princess, their place in the royal order of precedence. And suddenly, Charles found himself caught again, between legacy and loyalty. If he honored his mother's wish, he risked accusations of hypocrisy. If he ignored it, he risked being labeled cruel. And worse, he risked inflaming a transatlantic media war with Meghan at the helm. Meanwhile, Harry was spiraling, not in public, but in private. Friends said he became withdrawn, obsessively rereading old letters from the Queen, watching videos of them together from happier times, laughing at the 2012 Olympics, whispering jokes during Trooping the Color, sitting side by side at the Chelsea Flower Show. He missed her. He missed the one person who had always treated him with dignity, even when disappointed. And now, she was gone. And in her place stood an institution that felt colder, sharper, and more final than ever before. Still, even as he mourned, Harry made a decision. He would not let the Queen's final words be the last chapter in his story. If the crown wanted to use her legacy as justification, he would do the same. And that's when he began drafting something of his own. Not another book, not a legal memo, but a letter. A very specific letter, addressed to someone no one expected. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. He wasn't supposed to leave. Not like that. Not through that door. And certainly not alone. But Prince Harry, now formerly Earl of Dumbarton, had reached his limit. The fury was bubbling before his shoes even touched the polished parquet floors of Clarence House. But by the time he reached the courtyard, something in him had snapped. For years, he had endured cold shoulders, briefings behind his back, smears dressed up as sources, and the endless, suffocating politeness of a family more obsessed with optics than honesty. But this was different. They had taken his name, and then they dared to hide behind his grandmother's words to do it. The Queen's diary, her private, sacred words, had been weaponized by the very institution that had spent the last 5 years punishing him for stepping away. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. And so, when Harry stood from the formal chair across from King Charles, eyes narrowed and fists clenched, he didn't pause to shake hands. He didn't wait for the final bow. He didn't even let the butler open the door. He stormed out. And that's when the real chaos began. See, royal protocol isn't just a set of traditions. It's a security system. Every room Prince Harry enters as a senior royal, or even as a high-profile royal outsider, requires coordination. From bodyguards to corridor clearing, even his exits are meant to be choreographed down to the second. But Harry, in a moment of rage, broke that script. He walked out through the East Corridor, a path no longer used by working royals. A corridor that bypassed 2 checkpoints and emptied out toward the side garden where diplomatic cars usually parked. It was a blind spot, and someone was watching. Across the street, in a parked sedan with tinted windows, sat a paparazzo who had staked out the property on a tip from a freelance royal staffer, someone who'd overheard the timing of Harry's meeting and smelled opportunity. What that lens captured in those next 60 seconds would ripple across the world. Harry, flushed, pacing, yanking his coat from his assistant's hand. No royal protection officers in sight. No security escort. Just one man, in a dark coat, walking out of Clarence's house looking like he had been emotionally dismantled from the inside out. The photo was uploaded to a private newsroom server by 11:04 a.m. By 11:27 a.m., it had already been purchased by the Daily Express, Page 6, and an American wire service. And by noon, it was everywhere. Prince Harry storms out of Clarence's house alone. No security present. What happened behind closed doors? Earl of Dumbarton makes shocking solo exit after title stripped. But the headline wasn't the real issue. It was the question that followed. Where were his bodyguards? Now here's the twist. Prince Harry had formally lost taxpayer-funded security the moment he stepped down as a working royal in 2020. That was one of the more painful chapters of the Sandringham Summit, the so-called Megxit Accord. But during special UK visits sanctioned by the Crown, like this meeting, he was still temporarily granted private royal protection, coordinated by Scotland Yard. Except not this time, because someone, somewhere, had failed to activate the secondary protection protocol. And that someone's mistake had just become a full-scale international embarrassment. The Home Office was furious. The Metropolitan Police scrambled to release a statement that Harry had not requested armed escort for this personal visit, which, legally, was true, but not entirely true. Because a request had been made by Meghan a week earlier. She had contacted their London-based security coordinator asking that appropriate coverage be in place in case the situation escalates. That phrase, in case the situation escalates, was now at the heart of the storm, because someone inside the royal household had apparently interpreted that as an overreach, a paranoia, an inconvenience. And they said no. Unofficially, of course. No one wanted fingerprints on that decision. But it was enough to leave Harry exposed. So when the paparazzi photos leaked and the headlines questioned the absence of guards, Meghan's legal team went on the offensive. A source close to her team drafted a stern inquiry to the palace. Was the lack of security a procedural lapse or a deliberate act of negligence? Behind the scenes, the palace scrambled to contain the fallout. Sir Clive Alderton ordered an immediate internal review of Clarence House's security handoff procedures. Emails were scoured, phone logs reviewed, and then, a shock, a WhatsApp message, allegedly from a mid-level aide to another junior staffer, stating, "No need for escorts. He'll be gone before lunch. Let him walk. Let him walk." That line, when shared with the king by a senior official, reportedly left Charles ashen. He had not approved it, nor had Camilla. But someone under their roof had made a decision that risked not just Harry's safety, but the institution's reputation. And the worst part? Harry knew it. When he returned to his hotel, his private protection officer, hired at great personal cost, met him in the lobby and said only, "We weren't called. We were on standby." Harry reportedly just nodded, clenched his jaw, and disappeared into the elevator. That night, he didn't sleep. Multiple sources say he was pacing, reviewing the footage, looking at the photos, reading headlines, replaying the moment over and over. Was that the plan all along? To isolate me? To let me be seen like that? But then something changed. Anger turned into strategy. Because Harry realized something essential. They had given him the perfect narrative. A man stripped of his title, left without protection, walking alone from the palace that once promised to protect him. And the world had seen it. This wasn't just drama, it was symbolism. The monarchy had shown its hand. and the image had gone viral. And so, within 12 hours, Harry's media team began assembling a counterattack. A short video. Nothing fancy. No music. Just raw footage spliced together of Harry walking alone from Clarence's house, intercut with silent archival clips of him as a boy walking behind Princess Diana's casket. The message? Subtle, but devastating. History repeating. Alone. Again. But the clip was never posted. Because before it could be released, a call came through. Not from Charles. Not from Camilla. But from someone else entirely. A voice Harry hadn't heard in a long time. A voice from behind the palace walls. A voice who still held power in the family, but had remained silent. Until now. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming.